Hi everyone. Hope you had a good day in class today. Today was our sixth day of class, where we went away from our initial unit on foundational thinking, primary sources, scale, historical perspective, historiography, to humanity. And today's class was based upon a book by David Christian called This Fleeting World. Really excellent book. In fact, when I first started teaching this class, I assigned it to my students, the entire book. And unfortunately, I came to the realization it was too difficult for some. They just weren't ready for it. It may have been more for college level. It doesn't take away from the quality of the book. So instead of reading the whole book, we took some items from the book. I cherry picked so we could think about this new unit. Now, very controversial day, and I acknowledge that because when you are talking about human origins, it is inherently controversial. Now, all societies that have ever existed and all societies today have an origin story. Essentially, where did we come from? And not, well, I came from my dad and he came from my grandpa. I'm talking deeper. And a lot of these are very interesting stories. I mean, they entail myth, and they entail, magic animals and all sorts of things, whether it be in China, whether it be the Zulu of Southeast Africa, or the Greek myths, or the Mayan, or the Iroquois. Every society has an origin story. Now, in America, this question of origin has been controversial for a really long time. If you're honest about it, since the publishing of Origin of Species by Darwin, a very contentious, very controversial issue. This picture from American history is from the Scopes monkey trial almost 100 years ago, and it really hasn't gone away as a controversial item. Even a couple years ago, Bill Nye and Ken Ham had a pretty involved debate regarding creationism versus evolution, and I am not here to change anybody's mind if they're raised one way or the other. I just want to make this known that this class is going to be using evolution as its model, and not forcing you to believe it in your heart of hearts. Just want to be open and transparent as we move forward. Now, if you are going to buy into the model of a very old, billions of year Earth and life on this planet that is very, very old, the science behind it is carbon-14 dating, which would provide the evidence to the evolution story. Now, every living thing alive today and every living thing that has lived before, my dog, a fish, an amoeba, a tree, a tomato plant, it's all made of carbon. Every living thing is made of carbon. So when a living creature dies or a living thing dies, slowly carbon gets less and less and less. And with mathematics, you can take a formerly alive thing, check the amount of carbon, and it can date it. In this case, it looks like a saber-toothed tiger. And when it died, it had 100% of its carbon-14. It's 5,730 years, 50%, and you can see it's fairly precise. So that would be the evidence behind that. So if I date something that's really old, it's because carbon-14 has substantiated that. Now, also in class, we had this question, what makes human unique? And this is a very debatable question. In some classes, I was very devil's advocate or contrarian and getting people to think and disagreeing with them, because there are some items that you can say apply to just humans. Others you can say apply to others. I've heard some people say, well, communication. Well, my dog communicates with me when it needs to go out. And then they say, well, advanced communication. Some animal species, whales, have very advanced communications, and birds and whatnot. And you can go on and on and on. A lot of answers would be bipedal. You walk on 2 feet. Our thumbs, our hands, our brain capacity, our ability to put ourselves in the past, the future, self-actualization. There's lots of different answers, and that's, ripe for an anthropology class. But one thing I want to focus on is collective learning, because this is a history class. And the moment we became able to write, or we saved our writings from Herodotus, and we acknowledged that we should compile our knowledge and build upon it. This is a real turning point in human history, because whatever we learn in our lifetime, whatever knowledge we acquire, we can pass it on. And as it's passed on, the body of knowledge gets larger and larger, and it can be reevaluated and grown and improved upon. And over time, we get more knowledgeable, more knowledgeable. Maybe in 2017, we have too much knowledge. It's just, we're inundated with so much. But I think collective learning is an important turning point. Now, we ended class with essentially the Western origin stories. And there are 3 prevalent origin stories, and we're going to use one. As I said earlier, origin story number 1 is creationism, Judeo-Christianity, the book of Genesis, literal interpretation of Genesis. That would explain our origins. In Islam, there's a similar origin because it's a Western religion, but essentially you're using a religious text to explain our origin. The second origin story is something called multi-regionalism, and it's becoming less and less acknowledged and prevalent. A personal example, when I took anthropology at Michigan State in 1995, the primary model I was taught in 1995 was multi-regionalism, but it seems to be losing steam with time. It's essentially, there were pockets of humans that were throughout the world, and they developed in isolation from one another, and this would be the model of multi-regionalism. Now, the model we're going to use in this class is out of Africa, and this is the origin story where Homo sapiens originated in East Africa 160,000 years ago, 180,000 years ago, various numbers, and we moved, we walked, hunting and gathering. Hunting and gathering was a fairly simple way to subsist. You hunt the animals, you pick the berries. Formal education was fairly simple. Here's how you hunt, eat that berry, don't eat that berry. Here's how you do your basic thing. In fact, we believe they only worked about 4 hours a day, and the rest of the time was their own. And the amount of calories it took to survive was the amount of calories that they took in every day. It was a very sustainable way of doing business, and human beings did that for 165,000 years. And the gradual walk filled up the world. This was a land bridge, not an ice bridge. And human beings eventually reached the southern part of Argentina 15,000 years ago. And if we trace it back, it is all to Africa. And that is the out of Africa model. Now, a little piece of personal evidence. 4 years ago, Mr. Lurie and I had our cheeks swabbed with a Q-tip, and we put it in a vial, and we sent it to the National Geographic Genographic Project. And I want to share what came up here from that project. I thought I had it ready. I do have it ready. And this is what they came up with. There's the Genographic Project. Me personally, I am 2.6% Neanderthal, which is a fairly new development and understanding. Only recent years that we realize Homo sapien and Neanderthal did interbreed. By the way, 2.6 is a fairly normal amount of Neanderthal, considering, I know, you can make a joke about me being a wrestler, but it's pretty typical. And this is a little more recent genetics. My father is Italian. My mother is Swedish. No surprise there. But this 19% Southwest Asian was a little surprising too. But this is the part that's pertinent to what we learned about today. My mitochondrial DNA for my mother, my maternal lineage, is 150,000 years in East Africa. My paternal lineage, my father's, 180,000 years ago in East Africa. And then you can see the movement. So, controversial class, I understand that, but a little foundation as we move forward to the human story. Now, tomorrow's class is how archaeology works, and I hope you find it interesting, and I hope everybody has a good night. Thanks for watching.